Wonderful. Well, it's 3 past the hour here, so I'm going to kick off, and I will start by announcing that we do have Spanish interpretation for this event. And for those of you who are new to Zoom, you will see a little globe icon at the bottom of your screen. If you can click on that, and then you could choose Spanish interpretation. And then I will slowly begin while people are still connecting their audio to welcome you and thank you for joining. My name is Jennifer McCarthy. I work at GIZ and at the PARD Secretariat. And PARD is the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development. And PARD exists essentially to convene governments, multilateral entities, civil society, especially religious, traditional, and faith-based actors, as well as academia, in a safe space, providing continuity for dialogue, learning, and collaboration to better inform policy and practices in achieving the SDGs. And faith-sensitive mental health and psychosocial support. This work cuts across our thematic work streams on SDG 16, so sustaining peace, as well as SDG 3, health. And we at the PARD Secretariat are extremely honored to be able to support the work that has led up to this policy brief that is being launched today, alongside the many members who've driven and contributed to this work, including Arigatou International, Queen Margaret University, World Vision International, Syria Bright Future, the United States Institute of Peace, among many others. So in late 2022 and early 2023, we convened 3 roundtables that included more than 130 policymakers, practitioners, and academics. And these roundtables built on the best practices that were set forth in the booklet called Faith-Sensitive MHPSS to Foster Resilience in Children on the Move, which was developed and launched in 2021 and launched in early 2022. Faith-sensitive MHPSS for children on the move is a real need, as we all know, given the increasing levels of trauma and displacement facing millions of children every day. This collaborative work amongst us here helps us to identify barriers to MHPSS that is responsive to culture and faith among displaced children and their caregivers. Importantly, this collaboration that is manifest in the policy brief provides recommendations for strengthening responsiveness with the aim of boosting the effectiveness of existing and ongoing MHPSS activities. So I am immensely grateful for the time and resources that you have all brought to this work on faith-sensitive MHPSS. And I see it as a powerful example of how collaborative spaces for learning and exchange can manifest in concrete results and recommendations and can inform policy. And I'd also like to recognize the gratitude for the financial support from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, for the roundtables that were held in 2022 and 2023, so that these recommendations and the policy brief being launched here today could be elaborated in a consultative manner. So with that, welcome once again. I'm really looking forward to the next hour of deliberations, and I hand over to Eleonora. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. Before I get started, just a reminder, as I see many of you are logging in, please note there is Spanish interpretation available. And of course, you can also activate the closed captioning in a language of your preference as a function of the Zoom. So please feel free to do that, as well as we would like to welcome any one of you to introduce themselves in the chat so that we can also know who you are and keep in touch. I will be brief, but I wanted to give a little bit of a background and setting the context so that we can look in detail at why this work is important and why this group of partners has undertaken this work. As you probably know, many of us here are children activists working on child rights, working on the needs and well-being of children. And in this very moment, there are more children on the move than ever. This is due to several causes, certainly to violence, to war, to poverty, but also to the results of climate change and climate injustice. So this is the highest number never than before. UNICEF estimates that more than 70 million children worldwide are displaced, either within their own countries or they have migrated over borders. This means that these children are migrating in search for security, stability. Very often, they're also migrating unaccompanied, so without parents or caregivers that are taking care of them. Because of these displacements, we can see the effects on children on these. And these, first of all, the effects manifest because of the root causes that cause this displacement. So either they have witnessed violence or they themselves are victims of violence. They have been very often victims of violence during their migration, discrimination, poverty. So we can really see that the consequences on their overall holistic well-being and especially mental health are very serious. And we are registering very high rates of depression, of anxiety, and in some cases, post-traumatic stress disorder. So, of course, conflict exposure and also the dramatic situation of being on the move, the emotional deprivations that come with it, especially for those children that are getting on the move without parents, they take a very hard toll on the well-being of children. And they leave these children living under threat, both during the transit, the resettlement, and a resettlement and experiencing also of move that can last several years. So, of course, this causes many traumas and many difficult experiences for these children. At the same time, we also know that when children move, they move with everything they had with them that is part of their culture, their experiences, their life from before. And in these settings, faith, we've seen, plays a very important role. And this important role of faith in terms of building resilience, in terms of contributing to sense of hope, in terms also of feeling connected, also in the new communities where the children are setting, is what brought us together to work at this piece and to look at how faith-sensitive approaches can strengthen the work on mental health and psychosocial support for children on the move. We know that there is a wide body of research that has shown how if children have access to faith-sensitive, but overall appropriate and culturally sensitive spiritual support, this can really lead to strengthening their resilience and overall their well-being. So this is why we, as Jennifer was saying, we first mapped what are the good practices out there in several regions, and then we came together to really build a strong body of policy recommendations to see how this work that very often has been ad hoc can be integrated and strengthened at the institutional level for those agencies that are contributing to the well-being of children on the move. I will stop here also because our colleague from UNICEF, Cohen Sevenanth, has sent us a message that complements somehow also this opening and welcomes. Unfortunately, Cohen couldn't be with us today because he is currently in Fiji. So I'm going to quickly share with you all his brief words. And please let me know. I think this is working. You can see Cohen on the screen? Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Warm greetings from the Pacific, from Fiji concretely. Sorry I cannot be in this wonderful launch of the policy brief for faith-based support and the importance of faith-based structures for displaced populations in general, and particularly children. But I do want to express my support, and I'm very honored that you show this video now to the participants of this webinar. Currently, globally, there are more than 108 million people displaced. That's a lot of people, especially when you come from a small country like me, Belgium. Now, when you are displaced, something is happening which is called loss of place. And loss of place in psychology refers to the fact that basically you lose grip on your environment, you lose grip on the social structures, you lose grip on what is your role in the bigger picture. And therefore, you start to have problems with your identity as well. Now, faith-based structures, you can travel with them. They can come with you across the borders, across the regions that you travel, can help you cope with this very difficult emotion that is paired with loss of place. And therefore, I would really like to encourage to follow the recommendations that are in policy brief now, and that we really start to work with MHPSS sensitive programming, including faith-based institutions of beliefs and support systems. Thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you, Cohen, for sending this message from Fiji. And I would like now to continue with our program for today. Again, also a reminder for those coming in, there is interpretation available in Spanish and also the closed capturing that you can use from the Zoom. So let us continue with our program today without further ado. We have Alison Sheffer here with us from Erbil, Iraq. She is the WHO Special Initiative for Mental Health lead, and she will also give us some remarks framing the background and the need for engagement of faith in aid and development. Alison, over to you. Alison? I know she was connected before, but she also warned us that she might have some issues with power. So, Alison, are you there? And otherwise, we will make a flexible and adaptable program, and Alison will come in when she rejoins. And as you heard from Cohen, we're here today because we have very specific recommendations to share on the integration of faith sensitivity. And so maybe, Kathleen, let me jump straight on to you as the author of the policy brief. So over to you to present the document. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I've backed up a few slides in light of Alison not being here, just to share a bit of the case for kind of how before we got to the recommendations, so that a little bit of the landscape within which we develop this is clear. Okay, is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Excellent, great.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. All right, let me move this out of the way. Okay, so essentially,
Alison just rejoined us.
Okay, Alison, I'm happy to put this on ice and let you take it away.
Are you sure? I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm based in Erbil and in Iraq, and we get the occasional power cuts, and that was just a classic example of great timing. So would you like me to take on now, or should we finish?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Alison.
All right. Okay. So with that interesting introduction, thank you, everybody, for having us. And thank you, Eleanor and colleagues, for inviting me to speak on behalf of the World Health Organization today. So we've had a bit of background already. I caught most of it. And we know that more than 80% of children and adults around our world practice or believe in some kind of faith or religion. And we are starting to realize that failing to consider and work with faith communities in our humanitarian and development work could actually be likened to ignoring other critical issues, such as gender, disability, or even the broader context. So engaging with faith communities and faith-based frames of reference can't be optional for us. It has to be an essential element of our actions to pave the way for more opportunities to support people in crisis or in adversity. It also ensures that we're going to respect their foundational meaning, the meaning in their situational life. And of course, the other topic that's related today is we know that faith and religious practice can be inherently linked with mental, psychosocial, and overall well-being. Dialogue about faith and spirituality on religion and mental health and psychosocial support in humanitarian contexts has evolved over the past decade in particular. It's been really encouraging to see the debate finally shift to the realisation that addressing faith in humanitarian or MHPSS responses is not actually a violation of any codes of conduct or humanitarian principles. Instead, we would propose that the opposite is actually true, and this is also emphasised in the policy brief being launched today. Our commitments to neutrality and impartiality actually calls us to ensure that those we work with have been assisted and are being assisted to have access to their faith supports. There's also this growing and probably reasonably well-known body of evidence that shows mental health and well-being benefits for individuals who actively participate in spiritual practices. So we know that people who engage in spiritual practice can often have a reduced likelihood of substance use or misuse, higher perceptions of social support, lower suicide rates, and improved overall well-being. But we also know that there can be the potential of harm if faith-based practices become too rigid, or of course, if they become mentally or physically abusive. So in knowing these things, I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that faith leaders have been seeking out guidance and asking for help to support the people in their faith and wider communities. So we know that people commonly turn to religious leaders for support in times of crisis. They often seek practical assistance, advice, mental or psychosocial support, as well as spiritual support. So the inclusion of guidance for faith leaders, the inclusion of faith-sensitive approaches in our aid and development work really has to be central to our actions as any other action that we might undertake. Faith elements need to form part of our needs assessments. We need the competence as aid and development workers to facilitate faith-sensitive practice. We need to ensure the participation of faith communities and to ensure that they are participating also in work plans and implementation. And we need to do all this with faith communities and faith leaders alike. From an MHPSS perspective, the World Health Organization views faith leaders and communities to be really important stakeholders in the overall health and MHPSS system. They can support access to basic needs. They can be central places for communication or information about aid and development initiatives. And they can also provide important details about health and well-being that can encourage people to practice certain health and well-being activities on a daily basis. But most importantly, the WHO views that formal or informal faith communities can assist children and their caregivers to participate in and strengthen their community and family supports. So in the global MHPSS sector, we need to encourage faith communities that their role in providing psychosocial support should never be underestimated. Psychosocial support is not the same as treatment for mental health conditions, but it remains an essential need for individuals living with mental illness amongst any other illness. Psychosocial support might also be protecting people from future illness. And it contributes to the rights of people to belong to a community or a supportive social structure. So these types of psychosocial support actions are fully in line with the Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on MHPSS in emergencies, WHO and other recommendations for holistic support for people living with mental health conditions, and completely in line with WHO's promotion of overall health, which comprises physical, mental, social well-being and is not just about the absence of illness or the absence of mental illness. So faith communities have a really important role for people experiencing mental and psychosocial support difficulties, but also in being promotive of overall well-being. I would suggest, most of you would probably agree, that having access to faith-based and faith-sensitive support during a crisis is perhaps even more essential than at any other time. When children and their families are forcibly displaced for whatever reason, they leave so much behind. And I've said many times before that one of the things that people on the move do not leave behind is actually their faith. Their faith consistently moves with them. Adding to Eleonora's introduction, faith is something that can offer people on the move a sense of consolation and reassurance. Their faith is often one of their few sources of hope, and it has the potential to offer them a sense of comfort or safety. For children on the move, their faith can also help them to define the meaning in their lives, both during the times of crisis and long into the future as they grow older and potentially look back on their difficult life experiences. On behalf of WHO, I'd like to applaud the organisations who continue to advocate for faith-sensitive humanitarian approaches and for the policy brief being launched today. I encourage us all to keep advocating for this over time. Our approaches to faith-sensitive work in MHPSS and more broadly has actually come a long, long way. And I think there's still further to go, more evidence to build, improvements on how we implement this work. But it's encouraging to see where we're at today. We're launching the brief today, which is a great cause of celebration. And I encourage us all to keep this dialogue alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alison, for uploading us, but also for reminding us that this is a start. The launch today is a start, and indeed we need to continue to advocate. We need to continue to build evidence. And I think particularly also around the element that both you and Cohen mentioned, the sense of identity, the sense of meaning, and how this contributes to resilience and to the overall well-being. So really thank you for both being today a celebration and a moment to congratulate the effort of everyone that came together to build the brief, but also a moment to reflect on how we can bring this forward and strengthen it with further evidence. Thank you, Alison. And I see Kathleen Rutledge is ready to take us on what these policy recommendations entails and how each and every one of us can make them work. So Kathleen, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. And I just want to also just thank Alison and Kun and Eleonora, and just highlight a few slides that kind of reinforce what they were saying. And if you want to go deeper and you really want to see what are the sources that are backing up what we're saying, what are the guidelines that actually exist, all of these things are linked in the brief. Because I would expect, you'd want to critically engage in, where did we get this information? Where are we coming from? So I just want to highlight as well, in addition to what everyone has said, these are actually in our existing guidelines, exactly what Alison said. This is in our IASE MHPSS guidelines 2007. It's in the CBPS 2019 of IASE. It's already there. So we're not introducing anything new. We're not trying to be radical. We're trying to find ways to actually implement this in a way that's appropriate and ethical. And as mentioned in the previous slide, the Convention on the Rights of the Child already conceptualized child well-being as including spiritual developments so long ago. So this is not a new thing. The sphere standards for all sectors actually beyond MHPSS and peace building, which we're talking about today, talks about explicitly having a people-centered approach where we're really aware of the faith identity of the affected populations. We acknowledge that for some populations, these faith beliefs and affiliations and practices may be actually an essential part of coping and trying to find ways to adapt our sectoral programming to actually engage with the positive resilience promoting functions. And also, as Alison mentioned, we're very explicitly given guidance, to go ahead and implement this. And so all we're doing today with the policy brief and with the good practice brief that Arigatou and others have put out previously is to figure out how do we operationalize this. And I'm thankful for the indicators actually that IAC gives to say, these are 3 things we can look for. Have we identified the supports, and meaning, for example, usually this relates to spaces, individuals, it can be materials, it can be practices. So kind of these 4 things. Have we identified these things? Have you removed obstacles? And that's where I'm going to get to next, is that this group at the roundtables talked about barriers and what these barriers to responsive MHPSS might be. And also, have we enabled these practices? The policy brief is not calling on any agency to do something that they are not, to become something that they are not. We are called to facilitate, to make the appropriate connections, ensure that spaces, materials, access is available for people, not to become faith-based actors ourselves, but to fulfill the human rights laws and fulfill the humanitarian principles and these guidelines. And that is a part of facilitating access. So, and as everyone has mentioned before, these types of supports are not only crucial to trying to minimize and decrease the impact of the mental illness that is more likely among children who are affected by conflict and displacement. So it's trying to buffer, it actually, research shows it can buffer that and help to support effective approaches. But additionally, if 8 in 10 of the global population has some sort of faith affiliation, in any sort of standard displacement response that has community-based approaches at heart, one would be looking to try to reestablish a sense of safety, normal routines, stability. And for many groups, culture and faith routines at home were critical aspects of resilience promotion, coping with life, just the social networks, spaces, practices, connecting with people. So we will naturally want to be finding out, how do we help them to reestablish that in displacement context? And lastly, you'll notice we're linking this heavily with peace building because they are linked, and that's why they're linked in the brief. So, effective distress alleviation and an effective, recovery from acute trauma and acute distress events is directly associated with, ultimately, will the cycles of violence be perpetuated or continue? And additionally, and you'll see some of these links to resources in the brief, a lot of research and guidance shows that actually, engaging in faith elements in peace building activities, whether it be narratives of the faith or your faith actors, can actually improve the outcomes of reconciliation processes. So all the way around, there are these elements where we need to try to understand how we can engage. There are 3 key barriers that were identified by the roundtables, and Alison has rightly pointed to the major one. And I think in the desire to do the right thing, there has been a sense that applying neutrality and partiality means kind of don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about faith issues, when in reality, those principles were put in place appropriately to protect people from coercion, so that they wouldn't have to change their own beliefs or allegiances or practices in order to receive aid. That's one of the many things that they were trying to protect them from when these were developed, I think in 1990. And they're appropriate protections. However, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is that people of faith are saying, I have this right and this particular need and this particular coping capacity related to my faith and culture. Please enable me to have access to the supports that I need. And they're coming into displacement contexts, migration contexts, and they're being told, actually, that's not our business. We will help you with everything physical. We will help you with emotions, but anything else is outside our purview. So in actuality, the way that we're applying neutrality and partiality principles in terms of trying to have a secular approach is actually coercion in reverse. So it's actually denying people their priorities that that all of the principles and laws and guidelines have said actually really matter. So we're really out of sync with these principles, and misapplying them can create harm. The second barrier was very much related to having appropriate language and cultural competency in the teams that we in the implementing, into whether it's government departments as policymakers or responders or asylum processing groups. Essentially, what this relates to, this was particularly notable in indigenous groups, or in minority faith or minority languages, that there is inadequate support. And when these children are arriving and their caregivers are arriving, they're being sort of lumped into a majority. Well, you're most like this group, and so they're losing, they're not having access in part because of language barriers, but also they're even having their kind of identity and their own unique ways of coping and their own unique worldviews. One of the quotes was that they're being made invisible. And so there is a need to be sure we have diverse languages available, and cultural competency that goes deeper than just what are the major religious holidays. So really understanding, what do people think is actually the cause of mental illness? What is the cause of distress? How do I cope with this? The difference between responders' worldviews and those they're working with are so different that they end up operating sometimes in silos, meaning that people don't actually access and engage fully in the services we're trying to provide, and that our services are kind of working with one arm tied behind their back because they're not really connecting with the underlying worldviews of people and finding ways to engage. And so there was a huge barrier to actually responsive MHPSS. It's just not really having among our response teams and service providers cultural competency. A third and final barrier is broken trust and communication between local faith actors and external responders. Essentially, this is two ways. External responders, when I say external responders, I mean NGOs here as well, because many NGOs operate kind of within the secular industry and the system of the cluster systems coordinations and those types of responses. Faith actors are on the ground, as we know, and this I'm talking about formal faith institutions, but also just faith-inspired local groups providing de facto psychosocial support, emotional support, physical support in times of crisis. They've been there, they are there. They're the people in Syria when nobody else can get in there. They're the people that will be and are there decades after our industry has moved on to the next disaster and next crisis. And often feel that they're being instrumentalized. They'll come in if we can use them for their space, or they can implement our programs, we'll use them maybe. But otherwise, we don't necessarily think they've got value to bring to us. And on the other hand, there's real concern about, where does proselytization fit here? Is there a commitment to shared humanitarian values and neutrality? Where does this fit? Is this a violation? Will this lead to some sort of coercion? So there's in the field, I've experienced it firsthand as well, there's this standoff of, they're in our way, the local faith actors are in our way, possibly creating harm. This is the thinking. Local faith actors are thinking they're trampling us and definitely creating harm. However, I think what all of our groups would like to suggest, is that there are many external actors who really value local faith groups, and really know and understand that they need what local faith groups can bring. They need the cultural guidance. They need the direction to really understand the population. And at the same time, there are many local faith communities who are fully committed to neutrality and impartiality and to serving people regardless. So yes, there are times when both groups need to walk away because the missions just don't fit, but there are many in the middle that can work together. So the current sort of let's work in parallel isolation is a sad state of affairs that doesn't need to remain that way. And it's actually a barrier because we really need insight and local cultural guides to be able to do this effectively. So I'll just close quickly by highlighting the recommendations. You can read them in detail in the policy brief. Essentially, to uphold the principles of neutrality and partiality is the main one. And so we hope that some of the recommendations can help you do that. I'm not sure if my face is talking over the slide. Hopefully you can still see the slide. Okay. This is a biggie. I am an operational person. I want to know, how am I going to do this? So for me, it starts at the initial assessment stage. And Allison mentioned this as well. The same way we look at gender sensitivities or other types of issues that we need to consider, how do we adapt to, we need some standardized language that we can gather, what are the priorities, what are the coping mechanisms. I've seen one organization, and it might be on the call, IMC, did an Iraq assessment. Great question. What were your coping mechanisms before? Were there any related to faith? They got the information and then they adapted their programming accordingly. It's that nuts and bolts, that simple, right at the get-go. Also, naturally, absolutely encouraging children and youth to be an active part of informing us and telling us what do they want, what do they need, what do they, and being a part of their own solution. So more, kind of peer-to-peer groups supporting each other, that type of engagement. Because cultural competency is an issue, investing in context-specific assessments and staff training on the very specific faith and cultural norms in that context that might be influencing people's perceptions of mental health and well-being is really critical. And this goes far beyond, what does the majority religion think about this? It's like, in this community, what are the faith beliefs that are actually driving people's health-seeking behavior? What are the beliefs and norms that are influencing how people engage with mental health, how they see well-being? That level. And we need to train staff, and we need to have it written, because all of us know that if you're in humanitarian or short-term response, in 6 to 12 months, it'll be the next group in. So it needs to be systematic. It can't just be based on common knowledge. And this includes local team members, because some of this information is very community specific. And so unless your staff is from that community, they may also need that type of capacity development. Ensuring, as I mentioned, that staff have the capacity to offer services in languages that are appropriate for minority groups and indigenous groups, both the language and the understanding. And one of the recommendations of the body of participants was to develop and invest in capacity sharing partnerships to really change our thinking to being, we both need each other, between local faith actors and MHPSS providers. How can we come together? In my experience, it's about selecting, like-minded partners that we agree on common values, and mutually respecting what we need and can bring to each other, and sharing it in a matter of respect, for the goal of improving effectiveness and long-term sustainability after we are long gone. Finally, supporting faith leaders, including women of faith, that formal role is one major concern that you hear people talking about working with faith actors and faith communities. Is if you only work with the formal faith leaders, that can really disenfranchise women, and it can also disenfranchise youth, because in many contexts, formal faith leaders are men, and that's important and valid, but we also need to be looking out for who are the women of faith who are de facto leaders, who are influencing, who are supporting each other, that we can learn from, that we can engage in the program, that maybe they can help lead women's group, maybe they can define what the intervention will be. 2 things just to say, do no harm alert. And these are really important points. I want to clarify what faith-sensitive programming is not. It is not predetermining in advance automatic engagement with faith actors. It is not deciding, I'm going to work in this community, let me partner with a faith actor. That would be inappropriate. What it is about, because we need to protect people of no faith, we need to protect people of minority faith, we protect people who don't want faith as a part of their response. And so it is about, at the individual and household level, really being responsive, to what individuals want. Because as Alison said, there are many practices and belief systems that can create harm. And we need to really be guided by individuals to tell us and help us frame what type of support they need. So it begins with the individuals and asking, what role, if any, do they want faith language actors and practices to play, and making sure that we protect others. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to go deeper, there are links to all of these, resources and guidelines in the brief. And Andrea at the end will give an opportunity if you want to stay in touch. We're going to be developing further tools to support operationalization, you know what I mean, of faith-sensitive MHPSS and peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And as Kathleen said, the link to the policy brief is in the chat. Of course, we're also going to be sharing with everyone that has registered. And we are really hoping soon to have the translations available also in Spanish and in Arabic. We know this is very important, and we also want to acknowledge the contribution of all that participated in the Latin American consultation, as well in the consultations in the Middle East. So having these resources in the local language is really a priority for us, and we shall be doing this soon. Today, we also want to learn from you. So we have prepared a very short poll. It's only 2 questions, and I will ask Paula to share with us. We would like to really understand from you if you are somehow integrating faith-sensitive approaches in your mental health responses, working with children on the move and their families. And if yes, if you could share with us links, experiences, so that we can learn more. As we said, and also as Alison encouraged us at the very beginning, this is a first start. We have a set of recommendations, but we want to continue to collect effective practices. And in a little bit, we're going to listen also to some practices and implications of adapting faith-sensitive approaches. So Paula, maybe we can launch the poll now. Should be coming in our screens. Okay, we have a technical glitch. The poll is momentarily not working, but we're gonna resume on that. And meanwhile, also given the time, we want to move to listen to some of the practitioners in the field and getting practical tips for the uptake of the recommendations that Kathleen has just presented. So I would like to invite Peter Ventevogel from UNHCR, the Senior Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Officer, to share some reflections with us. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm not so much a practitioner in the field anymore, although maybe in my heart I still am, but I'm very much an HQ person these days. But thank you very much for the invitation. It's really good to see how this initiative got so much traction. It's a very impressive list of signatories that you have. So great work. I must confess that when I first read the policy brief, I thought, but what is now new? We know this by now in 2023, isn't it? And actually, apparently not. The message needs to be repeated over and again. And that is also true probably for the intervention that I'm going to make now, because many of the things that Koen and Alison and Kathleen said were also things that I had prepared. But still, I think it's good that we look at it from the different perspectives that we are starting with. So my own engagement with the topic of faith and spirituality in humanitarian work dates from 14 years ago, when I was the editor of a journal, Intervention Journal. I will put the link in the chat. It's a journal that is not still enough known, and I think it's good because they publish interesting articles. And in 2009, there was an article from someone from World Vision, Alison Schaefer, who at that time wrote a great paper on spirituality in humanitarian work. And I will put a link in the chat as well. That really started my engagement with the topic. The article also prompted debate. We asked various people from the field to respond, and we got lots of reactions. They were published in the next issue. And I want to highlight one of these issues from Grace Onyango, a psychosocial worker from Uganda. And what she wrote always stayed with me, because she refers also to some double standards in the secularized humanitarian world. So she wrote, "I've always wondered why an area that is such an essential part of people's culture and a way of life is so often neglected within our interventions. And I also wonder why this topic seems so difficult to discuss and even to generate tension and sometimes ridicule among aid workers. For example, in Uganda, aid workers tend to respect and sometimes even encourage the belief and practice of the Acholi people of stepping on raw eggs as a ceremonial symbol of purification and forgiveness. Yet these same humanitarian professionals can be very reluctant to give the same positive and encouraging attitude to using Christian practices. It was a reflection of just a decade ago, slightly more than a decade ago. And I hope it's not true anymore, but I think to some extent it's still true. So later, when I worked with UNHCR, I got involved in the work of the Lutheran World Foundation and Islamic Relief Worldwide. I think Attala Fitzgibbon is with us even, who started an initiative that ultimately led to the faith-sensitive approach in humanitarian responses, the guidance from 2018. I was closely involved in that work through the consultants also, Alistair and Wendy Ager from Queen Margaret University, even though in the end, and that's also telling, we as UNHCR chose not to formally endorse it because it's a complicated process, but also I think it reflected a bit like, what should we do exactly with faith-sensitive approaches, and where does it sit? Which division should actually sign this, whatever. And actually, since then, I thought that faith-sensitive things slipped a bit from my agenda. But then Andrea, who's organizing the whole thing here, told me that she liked the documents that UNHCR has produced over the last years on culture, context, and mental health of specific refugee groups. And then I realized actually she's right. We're still very much engaged in this. So we have these reviews on culture, context, and mental health of Syrians, of Rohingya, of Somali, and of South Sudanese, and there are more coming. And each of these documents highlight how important it is to understand, as an MHPSS professional, how the people you work with understand the world and understand and define themselves. And if you do that, almost invariably, issues around spirituality and faith come in, because it is so important for people. And also because the worldview around spiritual and other issues helps people to define what is at stake and what needs to be done about it. So I'm very much convinced that this should be a non-brainer. MHPSS professionals must be curious about spirituality and faith of the people they work with. And at least 4 things why it's so important. It's important, faith and spirituality is important for on understanding how people define mental health and psychosocial issues, which may or may not be in spiritual terms, but also related to how they define mind, body, soul, brain, and how these are related. And often that has to do with your spiritual worldview. Second point, how do people express mental health issues and psychosocial issues, which is often through idioms of distress that are colored by and shaped by faith and spirituality in many ways. You cannot understand it if you don't understand that background. 3, faith and spirituality defines if and where people will seek help, which may, as already was mentioned, often not be in the formal health or MHPSS sector. And lastly, and perhaps the most important one, faith and spirituality helps people making sense of it all, what's happening to them. So really for me, we need to repeat the message that MHPSS practitioners engage with faith and spirituality and are curious about this. yes, and there are certain issues that are a bit risky. And again, I'm a bit an old guy, but I have this old book, 2006, on a world upside down, turned upside down, on child MHPSS. And there is a very good chapter by Alison Strang from Queen Margaret University in the past, and Mike Wessels, on religion as a double-edged sword, being both a strong resource for coping and protection and meaning making, but also as something that can constitute or aggravate risks. So, but even that is a reason to engage more with faith and spirituality rather than put it aside. So I just can only say, why has it taken us so long to get here? So thanks to the organizers for putting this topic back squarely into the center of attention of the humanitarian world. Lastly, I'm very grateful as well to see that apart from the policy brief, there is a pledge being prepared for the Global Refugee Forum, which happens in Geneva in less than 2 weeks' time. And it's very exciting to see that the topic we're discussing today will also be presented there in the form of a pledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you also for this reminder. Indeed, it can be a double-edged sword. And indeed, the more we know, the better we are also prepared to mitigate the risk. This is also what Kathleen said at the end of the policy recommendation. We have to define both what faith sensitivity in MHPSS is, but also what is not. And this helps giving orientation, and this also defines the training that we give to the staff responding. So thank you very much. And now we're gonna continue with some experiences from the field. We have here with us Giovanni. Giovanni, I hope you hear us, you are connected. Giovanni Gomez is the Executive Director of Paz y Esperanza in Colombia, and he's gonna share with us some very concrete reflections from his work. I believe Giovanni is gonna speak in Spanish, and we will have interpretation available in English. Giovanni, over to you.
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Entonces voy a estar hablando pausado pues para la traducción. Entonces, primero que todo, espero pues que en este corto tiempo pueda transmitir un camino recorrido durante algún tiempo. Trataré de sintetizarlo de forma estratégica. Lo primero, vamos a situarnos en el contexto, en el territorio donde hacemos el acompañamiento o intervención. Lo primero es, Paz y Esperanza tiene trabajo pues, en varias partes de Colombia, entre ellos 2 asentamientos desplazados a las afueras de Medellín, Colombia. Uno es el asentamiento de Vereda Granizal y el otro es el asentamiento de Nueva Jerusalén, donde cada uno tiene entre 20.000 y 30.000 personas de diferentes lugares que se han desplazado y han emigrado. Y últimamente, pues últimos años atrás, emigración pues, de personas extranjeras, entre ellos venezolanos, entre otros. En esos asentamientos se dan algunas realidades que lastimosamente vulneran a los niños, niñas y adolescentes, como es el maltrato, el abuso, como es las violaciones, entre muchas otras que están allí dados, ya que es un territorio que está cooptado por violencias, tanto de grupos armados como el desconocimiento del mismo Estado, porque se encuentra entre limbos, entre 2 municipios grandes, Medellín y Bello, y quedan vulnerados pues de derechos. En este caso, nosotros como Paz y Esperanza, pues en el trabajo que tenemos con víctimas, trabajamos con mujeres, trabajamos con iglesias y también tenemos un trabajo especial con niños, niñas y adolescentes, las cuales muchos le hemos expuesto pues como un título, pero como para situarlos, les llamamos las nietas y nietos del destierro, porque aunque de ellas y ellos, estos niños y adolescentes, no son víctimas directas del conflicto armado en Colombia, un conflicto que lleva 60 años aquí en nuestro país, son víctimas indirectas. Sus abuelos, sus padres sí han sido víctimas, muchos del desplazamiento entre otros. Más o menos este es el contexto en el territorio que estamos. Podría ahondarlo más, pero quiero centrarme pues como en la práctica, que es la invitación. Nosotros tenemos varios procesos en el cual trabajamos durante el año con un equipo psicosocial, donde hay psicólogos, trabajadores sociales, entre otros, y trabajamos por medio de una metodología del arte, ¿cierto? Y por medio del arte también trabajamos lo teológico, pero también trabajamos el tema de la prevención, pero también trabajamos el tema de la intervención. Y todos estos temas basados en el arte, cuando hablo de arte estamos hablando de la danza, estamos hablando del teatro, estamos hablando de la parte artística plástica, la fotografía, porque es el lenguaje que podemos encontrar con los niños, niñas y adolescentes más cercanos a traerles estos temas tan grandes, tan estructurales que viene pasando en nuestra sociedad. Entonces, cuando esos temas estructurales son los términos violencias basadas en género, el feminicidio, el patriarcado, el machismo, el feminismo, entre otros, que son temas estructurales y por medio del proceso, por medio del arte, trabajamos estos temas sensibles como para ellas y ellos. Entonces, empezamos con estos temas y nos empiezan pues a salir o a visibilizarse diferentes componentes de sus vidas, porque cuando uno llega al corazón, en este caso de los niños, niñas y adolescentes, empiezan a sobresalir muchas cosas, entre ellos abusos, entre ellos ser testigo de violencias de raíz, entre otros, y uno de los grandes desafíos que encontramos nosotros es el silencio, porque lastimosamente cuando ocurre un abuso en estos territorios de violencia, las niñas y niños se quedan callados. Primero porque lo ven algo normal y lo segundo, lastimosamente, y segundo, porque posiblemente no sean conscientes de lo que está sucediendo alrededor. Entonces el arte nos ayuda para poder que ellos puedan conversar, que ellas puedan hablar, que ellas puedan sentir. Y una de las cosas que se hace cuando se rompe el silencio es que ellas puedan expresar sus emociones. Segundo, que ellas puedan siempre enviar su ubicación, porque lastimosamente en este territorio de violencias, ellas cuando andan solas, hablo mucho de ellas porque es la población que más trabajamos nosotros con niñas y adolescentes, es muy importante que su familia, pero también sus amigas conozcan su ubicación. Al ser un territorio de urbanismo masivo, pueden pasar muchas cosas. Segunda, tercero, siempre les recomendamos evitar estar solas, especialmente en lugares peligrosos. Como tal, el asentamiento tiene lugares centrales, pero también tiene lugares muy peligrosos en los cuales están rodeados. Otro es cuidar a otras mujeres. Lo buscamos en estos grupos de mujeres, de niñas y adolescentes, es que ellas mismas se cuiden, tanto en su autocuidado, pero también como mujeres, niñas y adolescentes se cuiden entre unas y las otras dentro de ese escenario. Y quinto, una de las cosas que para nosotros es muy fuerte es el denunciar cualquier tipo de violencia. Fuerte, ¿por qué? Porque tenemos un Estado que ya reconoce una ruta institucionalizada de, del derecho, ¿cierto? Por medio de actos pues, de violencia y abuso. Pero cuando se va a operar estas violencias, vimos, sentimos y también nos padecemos que esas rutas no son tan están en el papel, pero no se cumplen en las realidades. Entonces toca hacer muchas cosas y para eso pues tenemos varios casos. Uno de ellos, que la niña se quería suicidar y nos dijo en una feria de salud mental donde estaba el arte y todo este elemento de trabajar con unos y otras organizaciones, y nos dijo, no, yo me quiero suicidar ya, si no me sacan de mi casa, lo voy a hacer. Y pudimos activar la ruta, y una de las cosas que más nos sorprendimos, aquí en Colombia existe la Policía de Infancia y Adolescencia, y lo más que nos sorprendió es que activamos la ruta y Infancia y Adolescencia nos dijo que no pueden subir al territorio porque está vedado, es decir, no, está prohibido subir al territorio para activar esta ruta. Entonces nos tocó, después de muchos sinsabores y muchas cosas, pues llevarla a ella donde está la policía, lo cual es algo, pues de alguna forma no está bien, pues porque cuando uno activa la ruta, tiene que la policía o los entes gubernamentales tienen que proteger a la niña antes que cualquier cosa, porque el abusador, lastimosamente, estaba en su casa, era su padrastro. Les cuento esto es porque hemos visto que necesitamos, uno de los desafíos es el psicosocial, pues que lo tenemos dentro de la escucha, dentro del acompañamiento y todo, pero también es el jurídico, el saber que estas niñas hay que protegerlas desde, desde cuando hablan, cuando comunican lo que les está pasando, y poderlas acompañar en todo su proceso. Es un proceso bastante largo. Yo le digo a mi equipo de trabajo que la vida nos permitió salvar una vida, porque ella, por medio de esta feria de salud mental, pudo hablar, y al hablar, pues pudimos llevar toda la ruta. Al final, ella, de esa cara triste, esa cara de alguna forma triste que tenía, pudimos llevarla a un albergue cercano, pues de protección, y cambió su rostro, al menos de protección y de felicidad, de estar cuidada, de estar amada dentro de este espacio. Pero fue un proceso de bastante tiempo porque la ruta, como decía, institucional no era rigurosa. Entonces, por eso las políticas son tan importantes, porque nos dan claridades, pero también debemos, como pues, organizaciones y comunidades de fe, ser muy conscientes que hay que tener también acompañamiento estratégico, tanto de aliados y aliadas, pero también de diferentes escenarios. Y quisiera contarles pues como uno de estos testimonios, pues porque de alguna forma el trabajar con las emociones, trabajar con la salud mental de niños, de niñas y adolescentes nos desafían en gran manera, porque no son metodologías de adultos, no son metodologías, hay que buscar metodologías nuevas dentro de ese escenario del arte para poder cambiar, hacer conciencia, pero también dentro del el acompañamiento, también tener en cuenta que hay muchos desafíos. Y quiero contar, en mi corto tiempo, quiero cortar como un testimonio de una de ellas, pues tengo varios. Dice así: lo que me llamó la atención fue el feminicidio, porque nos enseñó a ser mujer y a no callar, porque tenemos derecho a la vida, y hay muchas cosas más. Lo que me pareció más significativo fue que tenemos derecho a muchas cosas, como a vestirnos como queremos, a decir lo que pensamos. La obra me pareció, la obra de teatro me pareció muy buena porque nos enseñó a no callar. Ella es una de las participantes de la obra de teatro que estuvimos haciendo durante 6 meses, y sigue diciendo ella, así que sucede algo, que lo digamos. Si la familia no nos cree, busquemos ayuda de otros adultos, que ellos sí nos van a creer. Me enseñó que las mujeres tenemos derecho a todo, y lo que me gustaría de estos encuentros es que deberían durar otro ratico más, que sigamos hablando del feminicidio y sobre los derechos que tengamos las mujeres, y me gustaría más juegos didácticos. Entonces, si ustedes miran esta frase, testimonio, dice, aunque no nos creen, lastimosamente, el adulto que está rodeando al niño y al adolescente, a veces no creen sobre los actos que ocurren a su alrededor. Y organizaciones y aliadas, pues, con los que trabajamos, son adultos que buscamos que se tenga confianza, acogida, y si les crean dentro de ese proceso, pues, como de ayuda que se está haciendo. Entonces, es una realidad bastante grande, las cuales tienen diferentes desafíos, y quiero remarcar 3 desafíos, entre otros, pues, que están pertenecientes. El primero es que la realidad palpita todos los días. Nos encontramos con un trabajo de prevención de suicidio, que no solamente es trabajar con niñas, niños directamente que están enmarcados. Aquí hay un montón de cifras que tengo acá en Colombia sobre ese tema, sin mencionar pues depresión, sin mencionar ansiedad, entre otros. Y vemos cómo nuestra juventud y nuestra niñez están marcados en ello. Esto palpita todos los días y debemos buscar un trabajo en equipo con diferentes instancias, entre iglesias católicas, iglesias cristianas, organizaciones de la sociedad civil, entre otros. Entre el equipo sea más robusto y sea más completo, vamos a poder acompañar mucho mejor las realidades. Otro elemento, otro desafío que tenemos es ante la realidad que nos sobrepasa, es necesario más interdisciplinariedad. En este caso, de los diferentes casos que hemos tenido jurídicos, nos ha acompañado una organización que se llama Frontera App, que tiene abogados. Nosotros, como tal, nos hemos enfocado en lo psicosocial, más no en el derecho. Entonces, esta alianza nos ha servido para acompañar mucho más efectivamente los casos que se nos han presentado. Lastimosamente, pagar un abogado es muy costoso para nuestra organización, porque estos casos pueden durar meses hasta años del que está allí. En esa interdisciplinariedad también está lo teológico, lo artístico. Nosotros trabajamos con agrupaciones artísticas alrededor, pues que tienen bastante experiencia en ello, y eso para poder profundizar mucho más el trabajo metodológico pues con los niños y niñas. Y una de las cosas pues que ustedes escucharon en el testimonio, y al final ella nos dice, eh, nos gustaría seguir, ¿cierto? Otro ratico más. Pues nosotros tenemos un trabajo todo el año, pero digamos que a lo que ya se refiere es que esos procesos deben ser continuos en el territorio, con la niñez y la adolescencia. Cada semana nosotros lo hacemos, durante el año trabajamos 10 meses, pero todavía nos falta mucha más población. Trabajamos con grupos pequeños porque creemos que eso es una forma de profundizar por medio de la parte artística, pues el trabajo que hacemos, pero creo que nos faltan mucho más niños y niñas y adolescentes que trabajar en estos asentamientos. Entonces, tenemos estos desafíos y el tema que nos trae hoy es el tema de cómo esas políticas en salud mental y apoyo psicosocial son pertinentes para el mundo y también pues para Colombia. Y definitivamente nosotros cada año que pasa nos damos cuenta de la necesidad, pero también nos damos cuenta de hay mucho por hacer. Y, y bueno, aquí estamos en una interdisciplinariedad espiritual, también profesional, entre muchas otras cosas. Les agradezco por la invitación y espero pues que este tiempo haya reflejado un caso entre muchos otros que tenemos, que pueda incorporarlo, pues que sea referente pues como para esta invitación que hemos recibido. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Giovanni, and especially thank you for elaborating on the how you have introduced faith sensitivity, working with children, therefore also with instruments such art, dance, and theater that can really also help children break the silence and break the barriers that often make them really also not speak about what is going on around them. So thank you for these very concrete examples. Thank you also for sharing the challenges and for highlighting the multidisciplinary approaches that we need to put in place when we want to have a very effective MHPSS interventions, because indeed, mental health and psychosocial support involves so much more than specialized mental health services, and there is a lot that we can really integrate from cultural activities, dance, arts, in the work that we do with children every day. I know we are a bit out of time, and I thank you, so many of you, for continuing to remain here. We have shared also the resources of Giovanni's organization, so you can learn more, and of a study that has been conducted by one of our partners here today, which is the United States Institute of Peace. I think without further ado, there are many ways that you can continue to engage in this work, and I will let my colleague Andrea Kaufman for World Vision elaborate on what the next steps could be to stay engaged with our group. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thanks really to everyone who's shared your expertise and experience. I think the needs of children, caregivers, and their communities for effective mental health and psychosocial support is obviously such a huge and really growing need. And I find it really encouraging that this push for culturally relevant and faith-sensitive MHPSS feels like it's growing into something like a movement. So many of our speakers highlighted the tremendous history of engagement. We have the fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, many of whom are on this call. They're not old, they're just a couple generations ago in the iterations. And I think we've been on a journey together as well, even just over the last couple of years, standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, saying the same messages in different ways and different audiences, bringing them to bear. And I think as we work together to ensure a more holistic understanding of the core humanitarian standards of impartiality and neutrality, listening to and from experts from across different geographies who have unique experiences and expertise to bring, I really am just struck by how much we have learned, how far we've come, and as I think others said, how far the opportunities ahead of us to really work together to deepen and broaden our engagement to meet the great needs that we see in communities where we work and serve. So I would really love to invite all of you to consider some concrete actions as we close. There are a few possibilities, and we'll share a link out where you can pick some things, say you want to stay in the mix and in the conversation in different ways. One possibility would be to join or support a future geographically focused dialogue or roundtable event where we do something like we did in the 3 things that helped us form the policy brief, but in a more localized way. A second would be sharing your own good practice and learning. We heard one example from Giovanni, but I know many of you have things that are maybe reflected in the literature, maybe not, and we want to help raise and learn from those things. A third would be that Peter mentioned the joint pledge that we're looking at under the Faith Action for Children on the Move network at the upcoming UNHCR Global Refugee Forum event. We will share a link out to that for others who want to engage. You can make a decision in advance of the Global Refugee Forum, or you can sign on later. There's not a quick deadline, but we really would love for you to join the work. It really is the things we've talked about: roundtable discussions, building training and capacity building resources, revising and updating the faith-sensitive MHPSS guidance to look at children and things that we've learned over the last 10 or 15 years. 10 years, yeah. And then finally, there's a longer term process that Kathleen is really coordinating and leading, looking at building evidence on the effectiveness of faith-sensitive MHPSS programming. So again, we're gonna drop a link to a Google form, and we'll also include it in our message follow-up to this for those of you who are here, and for those of you who are listening to this later. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and for joining us on this journey. Really hope let's go forward from here as part of a movement. Let's be encouraged and energized by the work that's happening as we do what we can in our corners, whether we're at HQ, as Peter said, or on the front lines to support the well-being, health, and mental health of children and caregivers and communities on the move. So thanks. Looking forward to engaging with you as we continue in this journey.